Hello, everybody. Welcome to our study on the Screwtape Letters. I was spending a little bit of time kind of given everything that's been going on lately, but with the shooting that took place 2 days ago, as well as the anniversary of the attack on the World Trade Center, and I was just trying to figure out what I wanted to talk about and what I wanted to do for a study for a while, honestly. And finally got to the point where I settled on the Screwtape Letters, which is kind of always a solid go-to in terms of just understanding the way in which Satan will attempt to really trick and I guess just lay his traps for you throughout the world. If you've never read the Screwtape Letters, they were written by C.S. Lewis, the same author who did Chronicles of Narnia, who by the time he was at this point in his writing career became deeply spiritual. Was the close friend of Sir J.R.R. Tolkien. So obviously somebody, very spiritual, very connected to God in his works. And yeah, I think the Screwtape Letters are possibly one of the best things he ever wrote, which is a tall order. So I do have it pulled up on the screen here. I also have my own personal study book because it has a bunch of notations on the side. So I'm going to try to make sure to keep them relatively in line with one another. I also, as always, as we go through this, if you guys are with me live or if you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and leave comments on your thoughts, anything that kind of strikes you as we go through this, because I would love to hear people's minds and then thoughts as we go through this. So this is a series of letters that is written between two demons. Screwtape, who is kind of a demon in hell, writing to his nephew Wormwood, who was attempting to make a human fall further and further from God, who he refers to the human as the patient, and God is referred to as the enemy, because obviously this is written from the point of view of the demons. So don't read into it that it's a satanic novel. It's not. It's something that's written in the way that demons might talk whenever they talk of these things. So, my dear Wormwood, I note what you say about guiding your patient's reading, and take care that he sees a good deal of his materialist friend. But are you not but are you not being a trifle naive? It sounds as if you suppose. Oh my gosh, I'm sorry, I'm having trouble reading. It sounds as if you supposed that argument was the best way to keep him out of the enemy's clutches. That might have been so if he had lived a few centuries earlier. At that time, the humans still knew pretty well when a thing was proved and when it was not. And if it was proved, they really believed it. So, I mean, it's also important to kind of realize that even though this book was written a hot minute ago, it's actually really only become more and more prevalent. What his uncle is actually arguing against here is the idea of making somebody debate another person in the attempt to dissuade them. Like, arguments like that, in a way whenever you're arguing something that is true and something that is not, that's a good way to make somebody have a disbelief. But in this day and age, we no longer have that. Everything is up for debate. Everything is up for an argument on what is true and what is false. Everything is up. So the greater trick the devil uses today is the fact that people assume they understand what's in the Bible, even if they've never actually touched one, just because it's so culturally significant that they think they automatically know what it is or what it is and what's in it. But yeah, just kind of something kind of as you go through this, it's important to take note of. They still connect thinking with doing, and were prepared to alter their way of life as the result of a chain of reasoning. But what with the weekly press and other such weapons, we have largely altered that. Mind you, this is again from the point of view of demons. So even back in Lewis's day, he's already pointing out that Satan largely has his hands in all forms of news media, today you could have social media to that too. Anything that is going to widely put out a spin on the public perception, on public narrative, Satan definitely has his hands in that. And that's something that was true in Lewis's day. It's very true in ours still. Your man has been accustomed, ever since he was a boy, to have a dozen incompatible philosophies dancing about together in his head. He does not think of doctrines as primarily true or false, but as academic or practical, outworn or contemporary, conventional or ruthless. Now, I wonder if I could relate that to anything modern days. Modern days are there teachings that are true and or sorry, that we don't think of as true as false, but that are academical or old-fashioned, or perhaps the conservative view or the enlightened view, the woke view, if you want to put it that way. People absolutely still teach things that way. We as humans love our black and white philosophies, our teachings to fall into this easily definable category where each side can declare that they are correct. And it's something we get very, very bad about because we love doing that. And it's not even a matter of who really is right or wrong. If it was simply that, then facts would need to be brought forward. But we no longer alter our view of the world and things according to facts. We do it largely by feelings, which is why we have things that are so messy, because feelings are complicated things. And people's feelings can't be false, which is why we have things that are so messy now, because we're trying to lead by feeling, but you can't lead by feeling. That just leads to ultimately a bunch of discourse, which is what we have now. Sorry, again, I'm reading this physically, so I'm trying to make sure we haven't dropped far back or anything. Jargon, not argument, is your best ally in keeping him from the church. Don't waste time trying to make him think that materialism is true. Make him think it is strong or stark or courageous. That is the philosophy of the future. That's the sort of thing he cares about. Lewis also touches upon this again later in a later letter, so maybe keep that in the back of your mind. But it's important to kind of understand what he's actually saying here. The devil's tools are not to try to persuade people that materialism is true. It's not even necessarily to argue that the church is false. It's to use the jargon to make them dismiss it out of hand. That is still his tool today. It happens far too much. The trouble about argument is that it moves the whole struggle onto the enemies. Again, in this context, the enemy, because this is between two demons, is God. Move the struggle onto the enemy's own ground. He can argue too. Whereas in really practical propaganda of the kind I am suggesting, he has been shown for centuries to be greatly inferior of our Father below. Our Father below, of course, referring to Satan or Lucifer. So what Screwtape is saying here is, if you make it a logical argument, if you bring it into a true discussion, God has shown time and time again that he can at least do battle on that ground, because there is then a consension that maybe the other side has a point, maybe the other side is correct. Speaking again in terms of someone else looking at the Christian lifestyle. But if you're simply going by these feelings, by this jargon, by this ideal, then, this whole, you could pick any philosophy of the modern world. What the easiest go-to is love, right? That's a big declaration of those who live in this very, very modern church, if you want to call it that. Again, church also in huge quotations there. But love is love, so therefore it doesn't matter if you're gay, if you're pedophilic, if you're, whatever. God made us that way, so love is love. Well, that's the jargon talk. Nowhere is that even remotely biblical. That's jargon. And jargon is something that is so hard to argue against, because it's just stuff that sounds good. I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the word of it. Prosperity preaching is also jargon, right? Nowhere in the Bible does it say, oh, well, by being a Christian, God is going to make you wealthy on earth. At certain points it talks about endeavors working out, but that's more in terms of Proverbs and more in a relation to the way you ought to live and the rewards you'll stack up for yourself in heaven. It's not saying that you should try to stack up rewards for yourself on earth. But yeah, that idea of prosperity preaching, that God will give you everything you desire, well, that's jargon. That's at best a half-truth, and often not that much. By the very act of arguing, you awaken the patient's reason. And once it is awake, who can foresee the result? Even if a particular train of thought can be twisted so as to end in our favor, you will find that you have been strengthening in your patient the fatal habit of attending to universal issues and withdrawing his attention from the stream of the immediate sense experiences. So, really consider what's being said there. If you take a step back and you look at the world as a whole and approach it logically, not even necessarily logically, but approach it from terms of a true and honest debate, actually examining the argument, it's so much more evident that what the Bible says is true. But whenever you react immediately via the senses, that's when you get into this messy jargon, this messy feelings and all of that. And you can't just rely solely on that. It's never going to go well. Your business is to fix his attention on the stream. Teach him to call it real life. And don't let him ask what he means by real. That's something that's also far too easy for us to do. Even as Christians, we'll get lost in the flow of our day-to-day life and what's immediately happening around us. And we call that real. And by doing that, we can, we're not supposed to, but we can fall into that trap of neglecting our relationship with God. Well, the problem is then we neglect what is actually real. But we call real that which we can immediately see, taste, touch, and smell, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, don't even question what you think of as real. Remember, he is not, like you, a pure spirit. Never having been a human, oh, that abominable advantage of the enemies, because only God has been fully God and fully human. Demons don't have that. Demons know how to twist and manipulate your mindset, but they've never actually been human. You don't realize how enslaved they are to the pressure of the ordinary. I once had a patient, a sound atheist, who used to read in a British museum. One day, as he sat reading, I saw a train of thought in his mind beginning to go the wrong way. In this case, this patient of Screwtapes is starting to consider God. The enemy, of course, was at his elbow in a moment. Before I knew where I was, I saw my 20 years' work beginning to totter. If I had lost my head and begun to attempt a defense by argument, I should have been undone. So note how, again, everything in this speaks to the demon's way of manipulation and twisting the words. As he tells Wormwood, and as he's making the case here, he can't just make it a straight debate. He can't just actually argue one-on-one. If that happens, he will inevitably lose, because that forces the patient to actually consider things. Instead, it's much easier just to try to persuade them by feeling, or try to persuade them that it's not worth actually looking into it. I mean, what does it really matter what, the Bible says? You know what it says, because everyone knows what it says, even if you've never read it. That's one of the enemy's greatest works that he'll pull on us. But I was not such a fool. I struck instantly at the part of the man which I had best under my control, and suggested it was just about time he had some lunch. Again, distracting the introspection with the immediate, with the sensory. The enemy, presumably, made the counter suggestion. You know how one can never quite overhear what he says to them. That's something that's so vital also to understand. Demons don't hear God, and even the lost don't hear God. It's something that takes a practiced ear, and we know that just biblically for a fact. Whenever God spoke and said that he was pleased with Jesus as his son, uh, some people heard thunder, some people heard the voice of God. Well, it's the same with us. They know when God is speaking because they know God is real, but they can't actually hear him. Sorry. Made the counter suggestion that this was much more important than lunch. At least, I think that must have been his line. For when I said, quite, in fact, much too important to tackle at the end of a morning, the patient brightened up considerably. And by the time I had added, much better come back after lunch and go into it with a fresh mind, he was already halfway out the door. Well, tell me we don't do that to ourselves. Tell me we don't have those moments when we're like, oh man, this is important. We should come back to this fresh. And I'm not saying that there's nothing to that if you've been running a problem around in your head for, a long period of time and you find that you're just stuck. But that's not what's actually happening here. This is actually a form of procrastination. And we are great at distracting ourselves to the point that we don't actually do what we should be doing, which is considering important things. Once he was in the streets, the battle was won. I showed him a newspaper boy shouting about the midday paper, and a number 73 bus going past, and before he had gone very far, I had got him into an unalterable conviction that whatever odd ideas might come into a man's head when he was shut up alone with his books, a healthy dose of real life, by which he meant the bus and the newsboy, was enough to show him that all that sort of thing just couldn't be true. I mean, I can't re-emphasize what Lewis is hitting on here enough. He is just slamming down this idea of how easily life will pull you away from God, even from considering it, because, real life is here, and that's just much more important and much more prevalent. And because you could only really start to connect to God and hear him when your mind and spirit are quiet and ready to receive, you'll just ultimately get yourself completely bogged down with real life. He knew he'd had a narrow escape, and in later years was fond of talking about that inarticulate sense for actuality, which is our ultimate safeguard against the aberrations of mere logic. He is now safe in our Father, again, because this is demons talking about Satan, in our Father's house. You begin to see the point. Thanks to the processes which we set at work in them centuries ago, they find it all but impossible to believe in the unfamiliar, while the familiar is before their eyes. Keep pressing home on him the ordinariness of things. Above all, do not attempt to use science, by which I mean real sciences. Again, this is talking about demons, so they're talking about what we think of when we think of science, as a defense against Christianity. They will positively encourage him to think about realities he can't touch or see. This has been the sad cases amongst modern physicists, and this is something that actually still happens today. You will find people who truly try to delve into the mysteries of life and that which exists around us, not just people that want to sound posthumous and bigger than they really are, but those people that actually want to learn about things. So often they will come to the conclusion that there must be something out there because science simply can't explain why things are happening with all the coincidences that they must have happened if there is nothing more out there. If he must dabble in science, keep him on economics and sociology. Don't let him get away from that invaluable real life. But the best of all is to let him read no science, but to give him a grand general idea. I mentioned this earlier, but to give him a grand general idea that he knows it all, and that everything he happens to have picked up in casual talk and reading is the result of modern investigation. Don't bother reading it yourself. Other people have already done this, and they've proven that it's not true. Don't bother doing the research yourself. I mean, after all, surely if God were real, somebody would have proved it by now, right? That means you don't have to read the Bible. Well, that's the kind of misleading teaching that Satan gives. And it's so easy to fall into it because it turns out it's much easier to not do things. It's much easier to not do the research. It's much easier to not pick up a Bible and try to see if it actually has anything valid in it. From the way some of you young fiends talk, anyone would suppose it was our job to teach. Your affectionate uncle, Screwtape. That is the end of the first letter, so hopefully now you can kind of understand exactly what I'm talking about when we say that these letters are rather hard-hitting, but vital to actually dissect and understand. And Lewis was somebody who really was not afraid from delving in on the deep end of this kind of stuff. People love to trash the Narnia series, which I've never fully understood because they're very blatant in their allegory. And it's like, okay, and that makes them bad. Especially considering so much of modern writing is much more blunt in allegories that have that feeling as a base. So letter 2. My dear Wormwood, I note with grave displeasure that your patient has become a Christian. Do not indulge the hope that you will escape the usual penalties. Again, because we're talking about two demons, they are punished if they fail to keep people from becoming Christians. Indeed, in your better moments, I trust you would hardly even wish to do so. In the meantime, we must make the best of the situation. There is no need to despair. Hundreds of these adult converters have been reclaimed after a brief sojourn in the enemy's camp and are now with us. Now, I will pause there because that's a point of some contention, and I can't really agree with Lewis on this point. Once somebody is signed and sealed by God, Satan cannot pluck them back out again. The Bible's pretty clear about that. So I don't know if this is a point that particularly I can agree with Lewis on. What I think Lewis is meaning in this is that people who give themselves to God can fall away from living the Christian life and can actually be detrimental to other people attempting to find God. And that's completely true. But as this is not scripture that we're reading, this is a lesson. I think it is important to kind of keep that grain of salt with it. And on that particular point, I think I would actually disagree with Lewis. Once you're signed and sealed in God, once it's true in your heart, once He is your choice in life, you can't be plucked out of His hand. All of these habits of the patient, both mentally and bodily, are still in our favors. Sorry, it should be worth mentioning before I totally get off that topic. That's a different thing from simply calling yourself Christian. Because there are plenty of people who call themselves Christian and aren't actually committed to God at all. And if that's what Lewis is referring to, then that's a completely different conversation. One of our great allies at present is the church itself. Do not misunderstand me. I do not mean the church as we see her, spread throughout all time and space, and rooted in eternity, terrible as an army with banners. Because, of course, demons do realize that. They see the church not as a building. The demons understand what we should understand, which is that the church is the body of believers spread throughout all of time. That, I confess, is a spectacle which makes our boldest tempters But fortunately, it is quite invisible to these humans. All your patient sees is the half-finished sham Gothic erection on the new building estate. Um, Mine is talking about a place in England where I believe the Church of England still actually is on that estate. If I'm not misunderstanding it, obviously I haven't done enough geological history to understand that truly. But point being that what Lou's saying here is that when somebody thinks of a church, they think of a building, they think of a place in that quote unquote real world. When he goes inside, he sees the local grocer with a rather oily expression on his face, bustling up to offer him one shiny little book containing a liturgy, which neither of them understands, and one shabby little book containing corrupt texts of a number of religious lyrics, mostly bad, and in very small print. So, whenever you walk into the church, at least it used to be, they would offer you a hymnal, because that's what they would sing all their songs out of. Nowadays, modern churches typically have a little bit more technology and a library that they use, but ultimately, he's basically saying that, these are things that if you let them become your connection to God, and obviously going to church and giving praise is wonderful. It's a great experience. Getting something out of sermons is wonderful. That should be what alters and helps you carry throughout as you go back into the world. But you can't let church become God, because then church and God only exist on Sunday mornings. And if that's the extent of what you have, then this is what your church is. It's the grocer, it's the song, it's the pastor. But God needs to be present in your very life. He needs to be something that is constantly singing to you, and you need to be constantly pursuing a closer and closer relationship with him. Apologies, my mouth is a little bit dry today. When he gets to his pew and looks round him, he sees just that selection of his neighbors, whom he has hitherto avoided. You want to lean pretty heavily on those neighbors. Make his mind flit to and fro between an expression like the body of Christ and the actual faces in the next pew. And that's something a lot of people have talked about is actually difficult to easily conflate, especially for those of us who have been personally wronged by somebody, usually in the family, but just in any matter. If they then turn about and start trying to convert and give their lives to God, it's very hard to look at this person that at best you feel annoyance with, or oftentimes you're very angry at, and to see them trying to pursue this higher life, something in the brain tweaks and really hates that, and it has a hard time conflating the two, which is kind of funny because we ourselves as Christians are to realize that obviously we've had this massive turnaround and no longer act the way we used to act. It's just very difficult for us to also accept that in somebody who has personally wronged us. Now we're called to, of course, it's part of the Lord's Prayer, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. But it's a very hard part. It's a very important part, but it's a very difficult part. It matters very little, of course, what kind of people in the next pew really contains. You may know one of them to be a great warrior on the enemy's side. No matter, your patience, thanks to our Father below, is a fool, provided that any of these neighbors sing a little out of tune, or have boots that squeak, or double chins, or odd clothes. The patient will easily believe that their religion must therefore be somehow ridiculous. And that's something that, the Bible talks about it at length too, how you can't judge people purely based on, physical appearance or the state of their clothes, things like that. I've even written songs about that. But the fact is that, especially if you still have the mindset of the world, you'll see that and you'll say, these guys, these are Christians, really? And that's what Lewis is delving into here is even when you start going and attending a service, your brain looks around, and if you're still thinking of it with a worldly mindset, you're still seeing people around you with a worldly mindset. It doesn't matter if they are if those people that they're looking at are earthly or not, because they're seeing them with an earthly judgment, if that makes sense. At his present stage, you see, he has the idea of Christians in his mind, which he supposes to be spiritual, but which, in fact, is largely pictorial. His mind is full of togas and sandals and armor and bare legs. And the mere fact that the other people in the church wear modern clothes is a real, though of course unconscious, difficulty to him. Never let it come to the surface. Never let him ask what he expected Christians to look like. Keep everything hazy in his mind now, and you will have all eternity wherein to amuse yourself, by producing in him the peculiar kind of clarity which hell affords. That's something that's actually important to kind of touch upon over and over again, is whenever you have an unclear idea of something in your mind, but you don't acknowledge that, whenever life that you're living doesn't hit that, you'll think that it must not be true. And in no case is that truer than people that are attempting to live in a spiritual realm. Um, I mean, to say, for example, if your pastor is overweight, there's a part of your mind that like just looks at that and thinks, well, that's ridiculous. But the reality is just that he is still in flesh. He's hopefully a very spiritual person and very deeply connected to God, but his body is still flesh. And, the idea that we expect everyone to be exactly as Jesus was is a ludicrous thing. That's the goal, of course, but we also need to realize that we're human. The people that we're sitting next to are human, and they're going to fall short in places, but that's not really what we're supposed to be focusing on. As long as their work is truly the work of God, then they're wonderful and beautiful, and they're doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing. Sorry, I lost my place a little bit. Work hard, then, on the disappointment or anticlimax, which is certainly coming to the patient during his first few weeks as a churchman. The enemy, God, allows this disappointment to occur on the threshold of every human endeavor. It occurs when the boy who has been enchanted in the nursery by stories from the Odyssey buckles down to really learn Greek. It occurs when lovers have gotten married and begin the real task of learning to live together. Mind you, of course, this was back during Lewis's day whenever people did that first. But, you can relate that just as easily to the modern day example of people who get married after living together and then find that that hasn't somehow solved all the problems they had as a couple, because it turns out that that actually wasn't their issue. Or even just couples that I've spoken out at length against this before, but you can't let the fact that you're in love, or what I will call infatuated with somebody, be what makes you love them. Love is a choice. You have to choose to love somebody. You don't have to choose to fall in love. You can do that 7 days a week. In love is easy. In love, for example, doesn't have to deal with, oh, well, they brought the wrong groceries home, or oh, they always make that noise whenever they pull out, the chair, or man, why can't she park better? Why can't he get the, whatever it is. In love doesn't mess with any of that. That stuff doesn't exist in love. What I've used kind of jokingly as an example, in romance novels and in dime store romance novels, it makes me laugh because they're so cartoonish in just the way they approach reality. In love, nobody has to fart. Farting is very much a part of love. If you've never wanted to if you've never kind of wanted to just slap the person you're sitting next to, can you really say that you love them? Really? Obviously I'm not encouraging that. I'm just saying that when you choose to love somebody, you're choosing to love them even when things are frustrating. If you've never been frustrated and you think you love them, you're just infatuated. And when people get married, when they're infatuated and then they are no longer infatuated, they're like, oh, well, something changed. Well, what changed is that you were never truly committed in the same way to that person. In every department of life, it marks the transition from dreaming aspiration to the laborer's doing. The enemy takes this risk because he has a curious fantasy of making all these disgusting little human vermin into what he calls his free lovers and servants. Sons is the word he uses. With his sorry, that's a hard word to say. Inverted love of degrading the whole spiritual world by unnatural liaisons with the two-legged animals. Basically saying that God wanting to be with us is something that Satan views as disgusting and unnatural. He thinks we are horrible little animals and vermin, and the fact that God loves us so much that he wants to be with us all the time is an unnatural thing to Satan. Again, because you have to keep in mind everything from this is from the point of view of devils and demons. He therefore refuses to carry them by their mere affections and habits to any of the goals which he sets before them. That's something that's so important to understand. You can't just keep living a worldly life and hope to achieve spiritual enlightenment. You can't hope to step into the glory of God while still being who you were. It requires change, and it requires dedication, and it requires work. And yes, it is difficult. It is going to be very difficult. Satan loves to hold on to the stranglehold he has on your earthly habits and your fascinations and lusts. That's excuse me. Something he knows will easily pull you away, and he will just wrestle with that as best he's capable of. He leaves them to do it on their own, and there lies their opportunity. Our opportunity, sorry. But also remember, there lies our danger. If once they get through this initial dryness successfully, they become much less dependent on emotion, and therefore much harder to tempt. And that's something else to keep in mind. If you can, there's times when we're still going to be in the valley, right? As long as we're on this side of heaven, we're going to have those struggles where it's like, man, I'm just in the thick of it. The enemy is sending torpedoes at me. But if you can get through a period of dryness, you'll know it next time. And the despair will not have a strong hold on you. It sounds hard, and it is hard, but the reality is that that's what it is. He's not going to let you fall. And once you understand that, you can get through a far greater period of struggle than you ever would have just on the first time. I have been writing hitherto on the assumption that the people in the next pew afford no rational ground for disappointment. Of course, if they do, if the patient knows that the woman with the absurd hat is a fanatical bridge player, or the man with squeaky boots a miser and an extortioner. These are obviously examples that are almost comically tame by today's standards. An example where we have fallen much faster than I think Lewis would have expected we could. But also, again, Lewis, mind you, here is not writing scripture. This is a lesson. But, I mean, I used this example earlier, but just to kind of carry his kind of example forth, say that for a fact that the guy sitting in the pew next to you is cheating on his wife. Well, man, that will drive the idea of love and compassion so far out of your mind. If you let those demons win, it will. Now, there's a lot to be said about approaching somebody in love about their lifestyle, and that's a whole other conversation. That is important, but also different to talking about your own personal mindset. Then your task is so much the easier. All you have to do is keep out of his mind the question, if I, being what I am, can consider that I am in some sense a Christian, why should the different vices of those people in the next pew prove that their religion is mere hypocrisy and conviction? We talked about that earlier. You may ask whether it is possible to keep such an obvious thought from occurring to the human mind. It is warm what it is. Apologies. I didn't sleep well last night. Handle him properly, and it simply won't come into his head. He has not been anything like long enough with the enemy to have any real humility yet. What he says, even on his knees, about his own sinfulness is all parrot talk. At the bottom, he still believes he has a run up to a very favorable credit balance in the enemy's ledger by allowing himself to be converted. And that's true. We think we have this attitude of once we are converted, therefore, like, we're great and golden and we've done everything we need to do. The reality is, and I've said this multiple times before, being saved is not the end of your journey. That's not the end of your walk. That's the first step. And it's a wonderful step. And once you make it, that's why you're welcomed with open arms and loved as the prodigal son was loved. We love to have you back. But that's not the end. And you can't say, okay, well, that's all I needed to do. That's not the way it works. Sorry. In the enemy's ledger by allowing himself to be converted, and thinks he is showing great humility and condescension in going into the church with these smug, commonplace neighbors at all. Keep him in that state of mind as long as you can. Your affectionate uncle, Screwtape. These are things, and as we go through all these letters, you'll see he kind of gets deeper and deeper into different effects. But I hope it's brought home how truly easy it is for the enemy to twist what you say and see so that you see those things in the way he wants you to. Because earth is his domain, and he is eager to keep you lost in it. You can't let him. You have to keep your focus on God. I know it's hard, especially when things are difficult in your life, but you have to do everything you can to set your day right in the morning. That's why I actually urge morning prayer as one of the best things you can do, because that's truly going to help you tackle the day and all the struggles you're going to face. Because if not, you're just leaving yourself as a wide open target. So please make sure that you set your priority by God in the morning and that you are really working to see things in the way that God wants you to see them. Otherwise, you will fall prey to tactics like this. But that's going to go ahead and do it for now. That's probably a decent stopping point. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys next time.